RTC, RTC.
Good morning, Turks and Caicos. Welcome to First Edition. I'm Cheryl Forman.
And I am Shivago Jolly.
And guess what, Shivago? We have the very distinct pleasure of having our very own acting governor, Her Excellency Anya Williams, in studio with us. Can you believe that?
I can't. We have to be on our best behavior.
You have to be on your best behavior. Your Excellency, morning. Welcome to First Edition. Thank you so much for taking time out to join us.
Good morning. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with you this morning.
For those of you tune in, we're on RTC 89.1 FM live and RTC Facebook page, also live with Her Excellency, the acting governor. Now, acting HE, this has been your longest period to act, some 855 calendar days. How has it been?
Busy. I think the best way to describe it is that it's been extremely busy. I was sworn in on March 29th as the acting governor of the Turks and Caicos Islands. As I said during my remarks that day, I had acted over 800 days prior to that in my tenure as deputy governor, but this is by far the longest stretch because I've been acting now for the past 12 weeks. The new governor arrives in another week or so on June 28th and will be officially sworn in on June 29th in the nation's capital.
Looking back over this tenure as acting governor, if we were to ask you at the end of next week to give us two of your most cherished moments, and likewise the day you'd like to erase from the calendar, what would you say?
So if I look back on my most cherished moments, I'll say that there are a few. What I've tried to accomplish during my governorship is to ensure that I spent time on all the islands in the Turks and Caicos, and I have been able to accomplish that. So I spent time in South Caicos. I was there for the start of their regatta, which was a great festival this year. Spent time in Salt Key, not only for the retirement ceremony for the outgoing DC and the installation of the new DC and police officer, but also recently during their homecoming. And then last week, we hosted Cabinet on North Caicos for the first time in over 15 years.
Wow.
And so I've spent time in all of the outer islands. And of course, we've had Cabinet several times in Grand Turk and in Providence Islands. So I believe the most cherished moments are being able to spend time in all of the islands to allow the people on the islands to see exactly what we were trying to do and accomplish during this term. In terms of the challenging moments, of course, there are challenges that we experience every day, particularly in terms of crime and so on. And quite recently, we've had an uptick in serious crime, and so that has been a concern. I've been spending a lot of time with the National Security Council. I'll say to you that within the last 10 days, we've had 3 separate National Security Council meetings, and so that has been a heavy focus as well. So it's been a mixture. It's been a mixture of highs and lows, as is everyday life.
Yeah. We saw the mother, I think, in you come out as well when we saw the Easter egg hunt and the children up there just this past weekend. Why did you feel the need to host those sort of events? It was a welcome change.
So I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something different because Waterloo in the past had typically been used to host cocktails and events. And I decided that I wanted during my tenure to do something different. I wanted to open the residence up to persons that had never had the opportunity to see it before and had never had the opportunity to experience it. And who better to have than the children of Grand Turk? And so I thought it was an excellent opportunity for them to come in to not only see the property, but to enjoy a nice Easter festivity. Yeah. It was great hearing from the children. We asked them questions, about when Waterloo was founded, and they knew so much history about the islands. And so I had the Easter egg hunt, but then also I welcomed the students from the Ona Glinton Primary. From their pageant, they were there as well. And then we've also had other school visits during the tenure. And I hope that is a tradition that the new governor will continue. Certainly, the Easter egg hunt is something that I would want us to continue every year.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, listeners and viewers, we have Her Excellency, the acting governor, in studio with us on First Edition. Shivago?
HE, so being the acting governor, obviously, this is a role head of state. You're the head of cabinet. You're responsible for national security. Do you find it difficult transitioning into the role of acting governor, now being the head of cabinet, being responsible for issues like national security, like, for example, crime, and then now when the new governor comes into play and you have to kind of hand over this role, having been in that position more in terms of leadership and action, and now having to hand over this role to a new person, kind of hoping that they have the level of interest or passion that you would have in ensuring issues like national security getting that kind of attention?
So what I'll say is that I'm no stranger to this. This will be the fifth governor that I've worked with since being deputy governor in these islands. And so I've worked very closely with the last four governors, providing support to them in the cabinet and also in the National Security Council. And so it wasn't that difficult stepping into the role then as the head, because I've had the experience of playing the supporting cast almost. And so even with the new governor coming, it's a transition period, one that I've grown accustomed to over the years, because I've been deputy governor now. This October will make 11 years. And during that time, this is now, as I said, the fifth governor. So every few years, we know that we go through this experience. I've had the opportunity to meet the new governor. Previously, she was in Turks and Caicos over a year ago for a governor's meeting. And then we've had the luxury, because her tenure was announced some time ago. We've had the opportunity during the last few months to meet regularly via Teams and to network with each other. We also spent time together in the UK when I was there for the coronation and the JMC. And so we've already worked out a rhythm of how the both of us intend to manage our task. And of course, I will support her in her role, just as I did the last four governors.
Now I'm going to piggyback on what Zhivago said about, your transitioning and your role in cabinet now, presiding over cabinet. Was there any change in the relationship? We know that cabinet are a group of people that you know well, you work with, you're friends with. Was there any change in behavior or any subtle changes that you saw having been the presiding officer in cabinet?
Well, I think because I've chaired on numerous occasions before, on average, the governor goes on leave. Most times during the year, the governor spends at least 8 to 10 weeks away. And so during that period, I would chair. Of course, as I said, this is a longer period. We've had 8 meetings of the cabinet during this last 12 weeks. It's been a very busy period for us because, of course, we had to finalize the approval of the budget. We went through extensive changes on the immigration and status ordinances, which are now out for consultation. We've had a number of investment proposals. We signed the development agreement last week with Hamilton University. We had groundbreaking. So it's been a very, very busy period. What I'll say about the cabinet relationship is that it's been very respectful and very supportive. I believe that the Turks and Caicos Islands and the cabinet as a whole, we're very grateful for the opportunity that has been provided to us. I mean, as I said, I've acted for extensive periods in the past, but I think that this is an exception. In Anguilla, for example, the new governor is arriving 3 months also away from the time that the last governor left, our new governor. And in the case of Anguilla, they have an interim governor that's actually sitting in. And the interim governor is actually the director of the overseas territory. And so Turks and Caicos could have had a similar position that we could have had an interim governor brought in for the period. But instead, they gave us the opportunity for me to act in the position for the extended period. And I believe that is a testament to the confidence that they have placed in not only myself, but also the premier and the cabinet. And I think that says a lot about Turks and Caicos and where we've come from to where we are now and how we're able to manage our affairs.
Yeah. We know it's tough, and besides all the ceremonial events and that sort of thing, the workload itself. So as a mom, as a wife, how do you balance work and home?
Well, it's always very difficult. I believe that having a good support system is important, but also understanding the do's and the don'ts. So there are some things that you simply cannot miss. And there's sometimes when you have to be able to say that, actually, I can't do this on this date because I have a commitment. This commitment is to my family and so on. It is difficult because there are times that you do miss. I mean, I've missed sporting events. I've missed other events. And the children, sometimes they're very accepting and other times they're not. So it's a challenge. It's a balance. I mean, yesterday was a holiday, but yesterday we were in a National Security Council meeting yesterday with the entire House of Assembly, the CPA, discussing informal settlements and the work that we're doing there. So we don't really get holidays. I mean, a Sunday morning you can wake up and your plan is to go to church, and all of a sudden there's been a serious crime incident or something else, and you're called into an urgent meeting. It's a sacrifice, but you do it for love of country.
So you've been a civil servant for quite some time. I think since 2003.
20 years.
20 years.
Yeah.
This makes 20 years. And you've risen to the ranks to the Ministry of Finance. I think you've been a DepSec, PS, pretty much held every role, ultimately becoming the Deputy Governor, which is basically the head of the civil service. Now as the acting governor, so head of cabinet in one hand, head of civil service in one hand. I'm going to pivot on that. So in my opinion, having worked for you with a number of years, I've seen you in your role and I've seen you demonstrate what you refer to as a testament that the Foreign Office would have had, that trust, allowing you to be the acting governor as opposed to bringing in an interim governor. And I think it shows humility by you saying it's not just you, it's the cabinet, it's the elective government. But having worked with you, I understand, and I've seen firsthand the level of trust they have in you. 800 days acting as acting governor would equal almost a term of an actual governor here. So if you take those accumulative days, you would have held the actual term a governor would have had in Turks. Knowing that we have assets like yourself and other elected officials and even civil servants out there that can perform at such a high level that the Foreign Office can recognize that, why aren't we taking steps towards some form of self-governance? And I was coming back there. But we have people like yourself that show that we can govern. We can govern at a high level. There are people here that have their priorities in order. Why are we headed in that direction? Just from your opinion, obviously.
First of all, I think that's a question for the elected government. I'm going to say that because it's the elected government that has the mandate of the people. The people elect the governments based on their manifesto and based on the objectives that they set for the country. And I believe that, of course, most countries want to work towards self-determination. And I believe you do that through progressive steps. And so that can be through constitutional advancement. That can be through changes in policy and legislation. And then, of course, you can decide also if you want to become independent. The UK has always been very clear that should territories wish to become independent, that they would facilitate the route to doing so. They've had those discussions in the past with other territories. They've had it with the realms. We know that Bermuda has a very advanced pre-independence constitution, but Bermuda later decided that they did not wish to go independent. And so should that be a route that the Turks and Caicos wishes to pursue, then I'm sure the UK would be supportive in that. But it would be a matter for the elected government to take it to the people and for the people of the country to decide by overwhelming majority. And I believe that is the key, that it has to be by overwhelming majority, that the people of the TCI decide that is the route that they would like the islands to take.
I'm going to stay on Zhivago's route there. We noticed that there's no one acting DG. Is that constitutionally not necessary? Was it your decision? Was there a need or no?
So the Constitution sets out a framework for the appointment of the governor. So, of course, the governor is appointed by the United Kingdom, and the deputy governor is a local appointment that must be made by the Secretary of State. If the governor is away from the territory, then we have an order of protocol. Then the deputy governor acts. If the deputy governor is away, the attorney general acts. And if the attorney general is away, then the permanent secretary of finance acts. The Constitution doesn't really speak to the deputy governor other than to say the deputy governor is appointed through various means. But of course, we can have persons act up in the role as deputy governor as well. Because of the work that we were doing at the time, in terms of the adjustments that were being made in my office and so on, we know that we have a new HR director. I have a new permanent secretary in my office. There was a number of recruitment and changes taking place. It was decided at the time that it would be best to hold on to both roles because we were going through a transition period. And simply because I've always done it in the past. So other times when I've acted as governor, I've always maintained my role as deputy governor. But there's nothing prohibiting us from appointing someone to act in the capacity of deputy governor. It isn't spelled out in the Constitution. So it doesn't say this is the way that it takes place, but it doesn't say no either. So I believe it's left at our discretion.
So that would be you as the acting governor that would make the decision who's acting deputy governor.
Yes.
But there's no specific criteria. It would just be picked.
There's
no specific criteria. In terms of the rank of permanent secretaries, the permanent secretary of finance by the Constitution is the most senior permanent secretary. But there's no protocol set out in the Constitution for the appointment of an acting deputy governor.
Did you enjoy this role for this period?
I did enjoy the role. I always enjoy the opportunity to serve my country, in whatever capacity, whether it went from when I was in finance, to when I became deputy governor, and all the times that I've had to even act in the role of governor. I always enjoy the opportunity to be able to serve my country and to be able to accomplish what I believe the country needs at the time. As I said, the last 12 weeks have been very, very busy. I mean, we've had 8 meetings of the cabinet, 4 meetings of the National Security Council. We've done a lot of work during the period. The Premier and I had the opportunity to attend both the coronation and the JMC, which was a historic event. Just this past weekend, we had the first King's Birthday Parade in Grand Turk. And so there's a lot that has happened over the period. And when I look back, I'm grateful for the opportunity. I think that's how I would describe the term, as being, very grateful for the opportunity provided. By the end of this tenure here, I would probably be up to almost 1,000 days acting as governor. But I'm just grateful for the opportunity. Always grateful to serve my country.
Yeah. HE, let's stay there. The King's Parade last weekend, we noticed it was slightly different. Of course, it was in Grand Turk, so it had to be, exceptional and different. I just said that for my co-host here.
I love Grand Turk. I love it. It's the nation's capital.
How pleased were you at what you saw?
So I was extremely pleased because we saw on display all of our uniform groups. And so we had a full contingent from the Royal Turks and Caicos Islands Police Force, our Turks and Caicos Islands Regiment, which I'm always proud to see displayed. We also had the Turks and Caicos Islands Cadets. We had the Turks and Caicos Islands Marine Corps. And then also we had our Girl Scouts, our Brownies, our Cubs, and all of the uniform groups from all the schools. And I think for the children especially, it's always, in the community of Grand Turk, it's always something that they look forward to. This year, the police band, they put a lot of effort into practicing and performing new songs. And so they put on a real show. And it was just to show gratitude, because the event is not only about the King's birthday. It's also a time when we honor our long-serving officers. And so several of our officers and I should have said also, the prison was also on display, because the prison also took part in the exercise. But we honored as well this weekend our officers in the Royal Turks and Caicos Islands Police Force, the prison, customs, and immigration for their long years of service. And I want to say a special thank you to those 4 groups, because those persons work hard every day, putting their lives on the line to sacrifice for the national security and safety of the Turks and Caicos Islands. And so we want to express our thanks to all of those persons, and to say, continue doing the great jobs that you do.
Yeah. We saw on parade too, I think they're called rainbows, the ones right below the brownies. And
they were at the culture. Yeah.
I saw adorable. You speaking to one or two of those little girls. Do you remember what you said?
I asked her how old she was, because I couldn't believe it.
They were like tiny tots.
She was so tiny. She was 3 years old, and she stood there. We tried to make sure that the parade was as short as possible. So our aim was to keep it an hour and under. We went a little bit over. We were an hour and 15 minutes, but 10 o'clock in the day at this time of year is extremely hot. But I was just amazed that the children were able to turn out, and they were so proud to be a part of it.
Yeah. And the community of Grand Turk turned out too.
Always.
We noticed that.
Always. Absolutely.
Always. The community of Grand Turk is always very, very supportive of community events. Always very supportive of community events.
Yeah.
That's my people over there in Grand Turk. Shout out to my people in the nation's capital, where I get the best food and I'm treated the best. So, HE, we've seen some characters come through in the form of governors, each with their own individual personalities. I always feel like each individual usually comes with their own mandate. You and I have worked together for, I think, 7 years, and sat across the desk from you. So I've seen you in your role having to be so flexible and dedicated. I mean, everyone is different. Some of them work 18 hours a day and they micromanage. Some of them work less hours a day and they expect basically you to do their job, to be blunt.
Are you saying you couldn't do it?
Oh, God, no. And we've had this conversation before. I respect her for her dedication. I mean, we're all dedicated, but there's levels, obviously. And her dedication to her country is definitely shown by how she does her job and the grace that she carries herself, because some of us don't have the temperament to have that grace and do that job. And I'm not one of those people. But nonetheless, how do you ever feel like, and I remember I've worked with you for a long time. Do you ever feel like in your role as deputy governor, like there's a conflict sometimes with maybe their mandate or what the top priority or what they believe the responsibility are as governor? Do you ever think it conflicts with your role as deputy governor, the head of civil servants, and more importantly as a Turks Islander?
So what I'll say on that is that every governor is very, very firm that they don't come here with a mandate. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I believe that I've said to them before that the country doesn't always agree with, because immediately when a governor is appointed, everyone looks at their background and then they try to assume what is going to be their focus. Mm-hmm. And I've said the same thing to the new governor. I've said to her, what is going to be your mandate? She said, well, I don't have a mandate. I want to come in and be very open-minded. I want to learn the islands, and then I will decide what are my priorities. Mm. And I said to her, I said, well, every time a governor is appointed, we look at the persons, look at the CV, mm-hmm. and then they align them. I said, in the case of the governor, Rick Todd, who I had the opportunity of working with first, I said his priority was that he was to help the Turks and Caicos Islands achieve their milestones. I said, and once he did that, he left. Mm-hmm. And then we moved on to Governor Buckingham. I said, and his priority, of course, was that he had to work to welcome the new government. Mm-hmm. I said, then we had John Freeman, and John Freeman's role was then to work with the government, to work through elections and to transition, to a new government. I said, and when we had Governor Dakin, everyone was surprised because they looked at his background, and his background was in military and so on. And everyone was with national security, and everyone was wondering, like, how is he going to fit in Turks and Caicos with this military background? But it worked out extremely well for us because that's when we had serious national security concerns, and we had the regiment and so on that were birthed, and that was amazing for us. And so our new governor, her background is that, of course, she is a lawyer, and she has experience in the legal field. So I've said to her, persons are assuming that you're going to come in and you're going to be focused on the judicial system or in other areas, and she's very clear that she doesn't want to be boxed into one area. She wants to be an all-encompassing governor. But what I will say to you is that what I do have is I do have the opportunity to appraise governors. And so the UK does reach out to me to ask me for feedback on every governor and the relationship. And I have said to the UK before in appointing governors, and I've been very firm with them in the last two instances, that the Turks and Caicos Islands is a very, very busy place. And what the Turks and Caicos Islands does not need is we do not need diplomats. We need technocrats. We need persons that are able to work because we don't have the luxury. The role of the governor here is not ceremonial. It is not a role that's built around attending events and being social. It is built around a working environment where the governor has to work. And so you have to have a governor that is agile, that is able to work, and that is able to get down into matters. Of course, you have to respect the role of the government because you don't want to micromanage, as you said earlier. But at the same time, it is not a ceremonial role. And so I've given that input into, previous recruitment exercises for governors. And I believe that that concern has been taken on board because we've seen the different types of governors appointed during the term.
Shivago mentioned your grace and your humility, H.E. And I wanted to ask, as a people and as a daughter of the soil, we often hear that a prophet has no honor in his own town. As a community, do you find that we give you the respect of the office, the respect of the individual perhaps when you enter a room? Do we stand? Do you find that people are respectful of your role and of you?
So Shivago's worked with me for numerous years, so he will tell you. I think he can agree or disagree with this, but I'm not a person that's very big on protocols.
At all.
I'm not a person that's very big on protocol.
Sounds like a rebel.
I'm not a person that gets caught up in the intricacies of the office. Even during my tenure now as acting governor, there are certain provisions that could have come along with the appointment that I did not take up. I'm still the person that drives my children to school every morning and does a lot of the things that I do as a normal day-to-day. I mean, sometimes persons would see me even in the supermarket and they say, you go to the supermarket, like, how are my children going to eat otherwise? Yes, I do. So I'm not caught up in those areas. I think that respect is something that is given to whom it is due. I always believe that. I believe in, more importantly than people showing me respect, that it's important for me to show others respect. And so I try to respect persons in their various capacities in the public service. I recognize that every public servant has an important role to play. From the cleaner straight up to the permanent secretary, every person is important. And so I try to keep an open door policy, but also trying to understand that, I think it's important for everyone in these positions to understand that these appointments are only for a season.
Mm-hmm.
And so even sometimes when persons would refer to me and they would say, Anya, and then they would correct themselves and they would say, oh, sorry, DJ. And I'll say, no, I'm going to always be Anya. That's always going to be my name and so on. So I'm not necessarily caught up on protocols. So I think that respect is something that works both ways. And for me, it's more important that I show respect to others, because what I'm focused on now is that, being in this position over 10 years, I'm focused on my legacy. And when I leave this position, what I want people to be able to look back and see what I would have been able to do for them or accomplish during the time, rather than what I was able to take away from it for myself.
It's true.
Yeah. And she gave us a good pivot. She mentioned the public service.
So, putting on your deputy governor hat. So I've been on this district administration bandwagon now for a couple of months, and I don't let anybody come in here without giving me their opinion on it. And you being the head of the civil service, I'd love to hear your opinion on it. So my belief is that I would like to see district administration grow and evolve. I think the way it is now, there's a lot of burden placed on elected officials, especially at the district level, in terms of the day-to-day operation of districts. Yeah. I would like to see districts divided, for example, into smaller groups. For example, Blue Hills would have 10 groups. We call it council seats if you want. And the district administration office would have, for example, councilmen that represent a smaller group, but the district administrator would be, for example, the head councilman or the mayor, which would have the municipal responsibilities. For example, the day-to-day operation of that particular district, whether it's waste disposal. You can even have municipal police, like the Blue Hills Police Department, that's separate from the Royal Turks Caicos Police Department. We can allow districts to be more autonomous and separated from politicians and elected officials, some of them have cabinet or executive responsibilities, which kind of take away from the day-to-day responsibilities and make communities feel neglected. You, as the head of civil service, what is your opinion on this? Do you think this is something that's feasible, or even more important, achievable?
I think, first of all, I'll start by saying it is achievable because you can develop the structures for it. I believe that district administration plays a very important role because communities around the Turks and Caicos Islands have significantly grown. And there are some communities, some constituencies where, you have to look at the number of persons that are in those constituencies, which are more than some islands in totality.
Correct.
District administration is very important because what district administration is set up to ensure is that every person in every constituency receives almost the same level of service. And I think what is important is that you have to take service to the people rather than having to force them to find ways to achieve it and to receive it. In terms of the structure and whether or not councils and so on, I think that is a matter to be considered through the Constitution. The government and the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition are leading a request for constitutional reform. In looking at that, there are requests to change the structure of the House of Assembly in terms of the appointments in the House of Assembly, whether it is through appointments or elected members and so on. There are discussions on local government. I don't think that they've gone as far as what you've suggested, but I believe that is a conversation to be had in terms of where the Turks and Caicos Islands wants to go in the future. We have a very, very growing population, and I believe that we will have to look at how we're able to better cater to those individual communities and to provide them with the level of service that's needed. For us and in the public service, what we're doing is we're working very, very ambitiously towards e-government, which we believe will help to be able to provide services to persons from the comfort of their home rather than having to physically visit offices. Yeah. And so my office has set a very ambitious agenda for this year in terms of what we want to accomplish. And a lot of it is around systems development and being able to transform the way that we offer services to the public, which we think will make a very, very big difference around the entire Turks and Caicos Islands.
Like the e-government.
A.G., a lot of harsh criticism has been levied at the public service. We know it's not due to a lack of training because you've offered that. But what do you think is the root cause for the unprofessionalism, the discourtesy, the lack of a work ethic? And how do you respond when you hear people criticizing the service?
I think you have to be you have to be fair. So there are some sections of the public service that are working extremely hard and that are working extremely well, and that is the challenge, because I believe sometimes the bad overshadows the good, because we have 2,000 public servants, and I will say to you that the large majority of those persons are very hardworking and are doing their absolute best every day to be able to deliver services to the public. And at our executive level, we have very hardworking permanent secretaries. We've recruited new deputy secretaries, persons that are very, very ambitious in terms of what they want to help the country to accomplish. But there are some areas where we have to acknowledge that we have challenges. And so, I think that what has happened is that the public service, in terms of the investment in systems and in changes to policy, hasn't really kept pace with the growth of the country. And so persons always use the comparison that in the past I could get a police record in a day. But the difference was that in the past you probably got about 10 to 20 police requests, police record requests in a day, whereas now you can have hundreds in a day. So we've now invested in a new system, and that system should be rolled out soon, where you should be able to go online and you can receive your police record in less than 72 hours. We are making investments. We are spending this year in the budget. Over the next 3 years, we have over $12.5 million in the budget for investments in border management. And so we're looking at a new border management system, looking at how we can improve the way that we review and approve work permits, because right now every work permit application still goes, majority of them, to the board, right, that has to sit and review each one. So I think the public service hasn't really kept pace with the growing demands, and that is a fair criticism. And so I think we have to acknowledge and accept that. And once you acknowledge that there's a problem, then my responsibility is to work towards how we fix it. And so that's what we're focused on now, is how do we fix it? And that is going to be our primary goal, is to improve service delivery across the public service, because we want the public service to have a good reputation. There are people every day that work, for the benefit of this country, to give service to the country, and we want the public service to have a good reputation.
Because we've seen both. I mean, we've gone in some departments and you do a double take to wonder, am I really in a government department? And then there's some where you walk in and okay.
And I always compare. I think you can have a completely different experience each time. You could have a different experience for me, and then I can go in tomorrow. Everything moves smoothly. Everyone's in a good mood. The customer service is great. And then you can go there one day, and the lines are incredibly long, and people aren't in a necessarily good mood. My question is, as the head of the civil service, and you could help explain to the community how the nature of this relationship, because you run and manage the civil service, but the elected government is responsible for how they're paid, how we approve new money to hire. And I always give you credit, because when I joined the civil service, we were coming off of a suspended constitution and interim administration, and basically half, I think, of the civil service was axed. So when I joined the civil service, it was an aggressive agenda of yours to grow the civil service, to at least get back there. And we've seen it gone and surpassed that substantially with the amount of civil servants that we're constantly seeing hire. And I know for a fact how aggressive you were about creating roles and hiring locals. It was always like, let's get these jobs out. How do we promote the fact that we're hiring? But how do you manage being aggressive about hiring and training staff when you're not the one deciding how much they make, approving the budget for hiring new people, because that's elected government who puts the budget before us and decide on it. So how do you balance that?
I think the difficulty is helping persons to understand that the role that finances play. And I believe that HR was not my background. I'm an accountant by profession. But I believe that is one of the reasons why I was selected at the time to become deputy governor, because of the fact that public service costs were so high, in terms of our budget. When I took on this position in 2012, we had just come out of a voluntary severance exercise where we had downsized the public service because the monthly cost was over 50% of our expenditure. And we know in Turks and Caicos, our revenue is very vulnerable. Our revenue is dependent on the tourism industry. And so it's subject to shocks, whether it's from hurricanes or pandemics or national security threats. There are concerns that, our revenue could be very, very significantly impacted by various means. And so you have to keep your fixed costs under certain ratios. And so for public service costs, we typically work to keep public service costs under 45%, trying to keep it closer towards 40%. And so that's a struggle, because in any given year, when we have budget requests, persons would write in and they would say, I need 50 staff, or I need 100 staff in this area, or I need this level of expenditure. And you often have to say, I'm sorry, you can't receive that. You're going to get 10 out of the 20 staff you asked for. And it's because of the fact that we're not able to grow our public service costs at that significant rate because our revenue is not growing at that rate. And so persons would hear that we have $200 million in the bank and so on. And they think, oh, the country has money. You should be able to do certain things. The country does have money, but the country has to be very cautious as to how it manages that money, particularly when you look at the fixed costs. And so I think what we've been trying to do is trying to balance the public service investment while at the same time being able to adhere to those ratios. And I really want to give the government credit for their support, because in the past few years, we've been able to make a lot of significant investments in the public service. And so we now have in place, following the suspension of the Constitution and the voluntary severance and the cessation of our gratuity program, we now have a new pension and gratuity program in place for post-1992 employees. And that pension account now has over $15 million in that account. And persons that would have left in the last year, they didn't leave empty-handed. They would have left with some form of a gratuity or pension. And so that's a significant investment in the public service. We are also right now carrying out a comprehensive pay and grading review, and we hope to implement the first phase by December of this year. And so what I've been saying to public servants is that the government is making significant investments in the public service, in your pay, in your pension, in your working conditions, and so on. And so if the government is making those investments, then you have a duty and a responsibility to ensure that you're carrying out the roles that you are required to do. And so accountability is a big part of our mandate also this year. So we will be launching new performance appraisal systems, a new training needs assessment to identify where gaps are in government and how we're able to properly address those, because we believe that if the government is going to make the investment, then we owe it to the people to give the type of service that they deserve.
Yeah. AG, again, we're not using this paintbrush across the entire public service because we know better. But there's also been a criticism about, the receipt of gifts. Is there some sort of established administrative process for the control of gifts, whether that's accepting, declining, or refusing? Or can civil servants receive gifts?
So there's a very, very established policy on gifts. And so there's a gifts policy. Of course, persons at the head of department level and above are required to file with the Integrity Commission biannually, and you're required to list all gifts that you would have received on those forms. But even so, even for the government itself, if you receive a gift, you have to notify the cabinet of that. So there's a very, very clear policy. You're not allowed to accept gifts of a certain value, of a certain nature. And if you do accept gifts, you have to declare it.
So you tell me I can't create a crab of rice to my good friend down at the department. They get in trouble?
And I see a nice Rolex without the diamonds that
I like. I know about all of that.
Exactly. I think that you have to look at. I think you have to look at the types of gifts, right? The types of gifts. So, of course, you have to look at whether or not those gifts are being considered as inducements for persons to carry out certain responsibilities. There's nothing wrong with you taking a card or something else, but of course, any cash payments, any significant gifts of significant value, those are prohibited, strictly prohibited.
And that falls under the Integrity Commission, who
falls
investigates.
Under the Integrity Commission, of course, as a part of your declaration. But that is, as I said, the Integrity Commission deals with senior public servants from HOD and above. But beneath that level also, there is a policy that you're not allowed to accept gifts and that you have to be able to declare that. So I think that that's the challenge, that there's a certain level where at HOD and above you're required to, but then below that people believe that there is not that requirement, but it is strictly prohibited by the Public Service Ordinance.
So AG, let's continue on that. What happens when you discover that a public servant has a private capacity interest that could influence his or her official decisions?
So you're supposed to declare, as I said, there is a standard procedure that you have to apply. There's a standard form that we have that you have to apply if you want to carry out private work. And for positions beneath the level of heads of departments, that's approved by the permanent secretary. Above that, it's approved by my office. And if it is found that you are carrying out duties and so on that conflict with your normal duties, then that is cause for you to be subject to disciplinary action or even dismissal if necessary.
I'm very familiar with that form.
Oh, yeah?
I've had to do it like 3-4 times.
Yes.
My private business. Man.
And there's no obligation to approval. It can be disapproved on the basis that it's in conflict with your normal duties or that it's going to require additional time even during work hours and so on, that's going to take you away from your primary duties. So there are conditions that are attached to those forms and to the approval.
Yeah.
Well, DJ, I know this doesn't fall in your capacity, but I'm curious your opinion on it because I've had friends and civil servants that have gone through an investigative process, an exhaustive process where they've had to pay for a legal defense and gone through this whole process, and it was found that they didn't act according to the law. But after this process is done, obviously, like we've exhausted a significant amount of finances, and obviously they're able to return to work, but they don't get their money back.
Yes.
They don't get that time or even a certain amount of reputation lost. Like, as a civil servant, I was a civil servant. How do you feel about that?
Well, that is a very, very significant concern. It is one that has been raised. So we know that if you have a case that goes before the Supreme Court and you win your case, you can claim monies back. But at the same time, in the public service, that provision is not in place. And it is a request that has been made by the public service, and my office has supported that if public servants have matters before the Integrity Commission and so on, where they require legal support and they are found not guilty, that they can receive back some level of funding from those programs, those exercises as well, because it has forced a number of persons into hardship because they've had to contract lawyers and so on, and they've been found not guilty, but the damage has already been suffered. So that is a request that we have made, and that the government has supported, and it's currently out for consultation with the Integrity Commission.
Yeah. Acting Governor, we hear a lot about ministers and their ministries and not having responsibility, and people accusing ministers of not doing things. We know that ministers do not have any direct control over their departments in their ministry. That's left to the permanent secretary. But if a minister is dissatisfied or displeased at the performance of a public servant, is it the responsibility of the permanent secretary to aid that minister in having the public servant transferred or moved? Or how does that work?
So the relationship between a permanent secretary and a minister is extremely important, because the minister sets the policy objectives, and of course the permanent secretary is the person that is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the ministries. And if there are challenges in terms of the ministry's delivery, it is the permanent secretary and the deputy secretary, their responsibility to ensure that those are addressed. And I don't like the word transfer because we don't want to transfer problems. But it is important for them to ensure that each department is meeting their objectives. And if those departments are not meeting their objectives, then they have to investigate why they're not meeting them, and they have to ensure that they're appropriately addressed. And as I said, even if it's in terms of the appraisals, ensuring that staff are properly appraised and that they're carrying out the roles that they're required to do, holding persons accountable is extremely important. And that is how the ministry is able to achieve their objectives. But the role the relationship between a permanent secretary and a minister is very, very critical.
Yeah.
So based on that, do you think that a minister should be able to select their permanent secretary, not just out of the pool, but bring in someone or host a number of interviews if they feel like the person they're with doesn't match with them personally? Obviously, it wouldn't be a matter of their capability, because that person has already gone through the process and held this position for some time. But if they feel like there's a personality clash and it kind of hinders both of them from performing at their highest level, do you think they should be able to, I guess you say transfer a problem isn't the best way, but I don't know, ask for another or a new permanent secretary? So
the public service is required to be apolitical. So ministers are not allowed to recruit their own permanent secretaries. Permanent secretaries are recruited and they're put into a pool. And when they're recruited, it's in their contracts that they're, with the exception of the permanent secretary of finance, who's directly recruited for the Ministry of Finance, all other permanent secretaries are in a pool and can be subject to transfer. If the relationship between a permanent secretary and a minister is being challenged, then the minister does have the opportunity to meet with myself and the governor to say that, they have concerns with the relationship. If it's found that, it would be a better solution for the permanent secretary to be placed elsewhere, then that is done. We've had situations where we've had persons that have been released from the service because there were concerns regarding outputs or relationships and so on. But I think it depends on each individual case. And so it's not a matter of, because we want to ensure that public servants don't feel as if they're victimized also. But at the same time, we have to ensure that ministers are able to meet their mandate. So it's on a case-by-case basis determining which ministers and permanent secretaries work the best together, how they can accomplish their goals, and trying to see how best they can do that. I mean, I'll say it even in my position. When I came in as deputy governor, I didn't get to choose every person that was in my office. I think the key to leadership is being able to work with any person and being able to develop and
get the most
still
out
accomplish, get the most out of what you need out of that relationship. And that's the way that it works in government.
I could see that because I'm sure he wouldn't have chosen Chicago.
No, I think I was thrusted upon her. Yes. When you asked her earlier about the lowest points is the highest and the lowest, I really thought she would say having to work with me.
No, I would never say that.
It's okay.
But Your Excellency, let's stay there for a little bit. Talking about performance appraisals. How often are they done? And we're in such a closely knit community and society where we're related to almost everyone. Are you satisfied that performance appraisals are done at their highest or simply checking the box?
So performance appraisals are actually required annually. And in order for you to, and we have an increment system. So in order for you to achieve an increment, you have to have 2 successful performance appraisals. But I will say to you that performance appraisals are only as effective as the person that sits behind them, because you have to be open and honest in how you appraise persons. And I will say to you that there are concerns, because sometimes you would have a person that there are known concerns, but that person's appraisal would come in at 80% and above. And you'd have to challenge the head of the department and say, I understand that there were concerns about this person's performance, but their appraisal is coming at this very high level. And I think that is a challenge with being in a small territory.
Yeah.
I don't like for persons to use the phrase that everyone knows each other, because everyone in Turks and Caicos does not know each other.
That's true.
But at the same time, we have a public service that is largely made up of Turks and Caicos Islanders. And I think that some persons do find it difficult to hold persons accountable in some instances, because they don't want to be the cause of someone losing their job or, in this case, losing out on a financial increment. But what I've said to heads of departments and to permanent secretaries and others before is that you're doing the person and the country a disservice by doing so, because the person is not performing at the level that they should, and the public is not receiving the level of service that they should. So you have to be more honest with your appraisals. And if the person is really appreciative of the opportunity that's provided to them to be in the job that they are in, then they would do what's necessary to keep that job. And so we're being very, very firm on appraisals. We're launching a new appraisal system. We're simplifying the system, because the current system as well is not as automated as we would like for it to be. And so even for myself, for example, if I wanted to pull a report right now that shows me how many persons last year passed or failed their appraisals, I'll have to go to the compliance manager to pull up that information. And so we're looking at a new system that is able to better track the information, better record. And then looking also, as I said, at those skills gaps that need to be filled.
So earlier you were talking about e-government being a very important item on the agenda moving forward. How near are we to simplifying so much of these tedious processes that involve paper and tangible submissions to getting to the point of e-government, and how much money are we prepared to spend on it to make this happen?
So over the course of the next 3 years, we already have $15 million programmed in the budget for e-government. And so that the first start is actually putting in place the money to be able to do so, because it is a costly exercise. And the second is, of course, having the commitment to do so. And we have the commitment to do so. In my office alone, we are launching a new HR system. This year, we're working towards e-jobs, and so that persons can apply actually online. We started last year. We launched the jobs portal online, where you can actually go online and look at all vacancies and so on. But now we want to take it a step further, that you can actually submit your application online. You can complete a profile. So we're doing that. We're launching e-procurement, so that you don't have to travel to Grand Turk with your brown envelope to put it into the tender box. So we're launching e-procurement. As I said, we have the new border management system. We're looking at e-gates for the airport. So it's similar to when you travel to the UK and you can just use your passport
and go straight
and swipe and go through. So we're being very deliberate about the e-programs that we want to offer. And I believe that these things take time, but I believe in the next 12 to 24 months, you're going to start to see a real difference. And I don't want persons to become weary when I say 12 to 24 months because it does sound like a long time. You'll start to see more happen before then, but I think by that time you'll start to see real drastic changes in how we're able to offer our services, even in terms of births and records and deaths. There should be no reason why you can't receive your birth certificates within less than 48 hours because we are working on the changes that are needed there in those areas to help you to be able to walk into a department, pay for a service, and receive it in a timely fashion.
So, Madam Acting Governor, how do you pacify the public servant who says, all this e-government business sounds like I'm not going to be needed?
Well, you will be needed, but you'll be needed for other functions. And so we're moving away from manual functions to being able to carry out other work. And so I don't think persons should feel afraid of e-government because it's not going to result in a loss of jobs. But what it will likely result in is a retooling and reskilling of staff. So whereas someone right now was looking at just filing or doing other work, then we can reskill those persons to carry out other tasks. We have a professional development fund. We offer full scholarships to now we don't need to because if you're a Turks and Caicos Islander, you can go to community college for free. And we want more Turks and Caicos Islanders to really take advantage of that because that's a great opportunity so that you can move into other career paths. And then there are persons, that say that, I'm not inclined to go to the community college. Well, we have the TVET programs also. So we have the technical programs that you can pursue also. So the opportunities are endless. And I think that it's important that persons take advantage of them because we can only open the door, but you have to walk through it.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, they're not going to lose their jobs. It just leads to more efficiency.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that's what the country's crying for, rightfully so.
So, A.G., you've been deputy governor for 10 years.
Yes.
Do you envision another 10?
That is very difficult to answer. First off, I'm going to say this, that I'm appointed by Her Majesty's government, and I serve at their pleasure. I have to meet my performance objectives, just like every other public servant. When I was appointed to this role, I had to set out a manifesto of what I had intended to accomplish, and I was able to report back on that manifesto to say that these are the things that I advised in my manifesto I was going to accomplish, and I have. I have set out a very ambitious program for the public service. Even this year alone, we have 10 key objectives, and we're going to announce those shortly that we're going to be working towards. And so I still have a number of programs that I want to implement before my tenure as deputy governor concludes. Whether that's going to take 10 years for me to complete those or 5 years or whatever the case, I don't know as yet. But what I will say is that I still have a program that I'm working towards, and I'm very focused on my legacy and where I want to leave the public service. I have been able to accomplish some of those goals. And so when I came into the public service, only 50% of the management structure was filled by Turks and Caicos Islanders. That now sits at 84%.
Wow.
We had no pension and gratuity program. Now, after 10 years of being in post, we have been able to implement that. We've put in place the professional development fund to allow public servants to retool and to reskill themselves. And so that's extremely important. This pay and grading review is extremely important because the last pay and grading review was actually implemented in 2014, shortly after I joined as deputy governor. And so that's important. And there are a number of other programs that I want to implement in the public service. And once I can do that, I believe that the public service will be, and e-government, of course, I definitely would want to leave the public service in a better form than it is right now in terms of the way we offer services to the public. And I think that once I can do that, I can look back on my tenure and feel that I would have accomplished all that I needed to do and feel very proud of the service that I was able to give to my country.
A.G., we know time is winding now, but one of our listeners and viewers just wanted us to ask, when is it, not necessary, but when do you advertise externally rather than nationally?
Okay.
Yeah.
So all positions beneath the level of, we have 10 grades in government. All positions beneath the level of grade 5 are only advertised locally. All positions above that level, if it's grade 6 and above, and grade 6 is where basically we require a first degree and so on. Those positions can be advertised overseas, but they don't all have to be advertised overseas.
Okay.
So, for example, permanent secretary and deputy secretary positions are strictly reserved for Turks and Caicos Islanders. We do not advertise overseas for those positions, and we don't advertise overseas for positions in immigration and in certain other areas. So it depends on the post.
Okay.
Our goal, as I said, is to fill all posts in the public service if we can with Turks and Caicos Islanders, but we struggle in some areas. I mean, I really, really struggle right now in terms of teaching. We are in a real battle for teachers because America lost a lot of teachers during the pandemic, and America is offering citizenship and other perks to teachers. So
Canada
we lost, and Canada also. So we lost a lot of teachers to the USA and Canada. Cayman Islands is paying their teachers $60,000 for their salary. And so we lose teachers, and we're not educating teachers in Turks and Caicos Islands at the same rate. And I know persons in TCI will say, well, we're not paying enough. We're trying to pay more. Last time we did a pay and grading review, we gave teachers a 35% salary increase. And even now we're doing a new pay and grading review. Our consultants are meeting with the Teachers Association and others to look at the pay that we have to put in place for teachers. But it's a struggle. So if you look at the positions that are largely filled in government by persons from overseas, they are the teaching positions, they are the nursing positions, they are some of those technical positions that we really, really struggle to fill. And I think that it has to tie into our scholarship policy. We have to be more deliberate about where we offer scholarships. And if we offer scholarships, people have to return back to Turks and Caicos.
That's a problem.
We were in the UK recently, the Premier and I, and we had meetings with the diaspora there. And the students were asking us, why should they return to Turks and Caicos?
It's a fair question.
And I had to ask them, if you don't return to Turks and Caicos, then who do you see being able to lead your country? You have to return to Turks and Caicos, one, because government has assisted you in your education to be where you are, and you have to make a contribution back to your country. But if you don't return, who else is going to? How are we going to build and develop the country? And so it's a challenge because, especially for students going to the UK, they have the ability to work, they have the ability to receive benefits, they have the ability to tour Europe and to do lots of other things that they can't do in Turks and Caicos. And so we're educating a lot of persons, but the rate at which some of them are returning is not at the level where we wanted to. So we have to be very, very deliberate with our scholarship policy because there are areas in government that we're really struggling to recruit. And we're competing with the private sector. We're really, really competing with the private sector. I mean, the salaries that we pay, for some of our engineering and other positions, the private sector pays more than what I would earn as deputy governor or as a minister would earn. So we're really struggling to get people into these roles. So it's not that we're trying to recruit overseas, it's that we're just struggling to recruit locally for some of these positions.
It's interesting. Cuba was suffering with the same problem about 50, 60 years ago, getting people to become teachers and police officers. And what they did, they had, it's a socialist government, so they had the civil service was the bulk of their expenses, more than 50% of their annual budget. So they start snatching up admin staff, every front person that works at the front desk, the office administrator, and give them a pay increase, send them to teacher training school, police training school, and they shifted most of that labor force towards teaching and police. And then if you're a HOD or something, you better learn to copy your own documents and type up your own letters and stuff, and when you're building nation, you got to make those kind of sacrifices. You want certain luxuries, but it's the same thing that the HE said. In Europe and other countries, you get to travel. You could go to Greece on the weekend and come right back. But we're a building nation. We don't have the luxuries that other countries have. This is our generation now. We're going to have to make certain sacrifices, do certain things. So, you get to go to UK and Europe for your education, but you got to come home. That's the long and short of it. Now, your children might get the luxury of staying and traveling for the summer and spending 10 years over there before they come home. But we have to go to school and come right back as soon as we're done because our country is dependent on us to grow. It's just the long and short of it.
Yes.
All right, CF. More questions?
Yeah.
You in this form.
This is a former public servant, HE. Actually, a former PS, I think. The question is, how is succession planning working if above grade 6 are advertised overseas?
So succession planning is working where we have persons identified as, for example, if we have an HOD from overseas, we typically try to recruit a deputy from locally. So that person works to understudy that person to take on the role. But as I said, it depends also on how that person is performing. Because you can't place a person in a role where they're not able to perform. But succession planning is in place in the public service, but it depends, as I said, on the training program, that the training path that person is placed on, and their ability to assume the role once that person departs from the position. It's very easy, I would say, with contract workers to release them from the public service, because if they don't perform, they're on a 2-year contract, and at the end of the contract, you have the decision to not renew. But the public servants that are on, lifetime employment and so on, those persons have to be able to perform, to take on the roles. Otherwise, you do them a disservice that they can't perform in the role, and you also do the country a disservice in doing so. So we're not retaining persons in the public service just because they're there. We want to retain the best in the public service, but the public service has roles and responsibilities that we have to deliver on.
So how close are we to compensating at the level of the private sector?
That's a very difficult decision to make, and a very difficult path, because, as I said, you have to look at which areas, right? So there are some areas in the government that actually are on par with the public service. So we do pay our administrative staff fairly well, right? And if you look at the comparison, the private sector is there. But when you look, as I said, at the technical positions, you would never really be able to compete with the private sector. I mean, in my role, even as deputy governor, my pay is lower than most of these CEOs of the statutory bodies and so on. And if you look at our engineers are paid, they can make that, off of one probably single contract in the private sector and so on. And so we're going to try our best to bring it very close to the private sector and so on. But I think it has to be from an affordability standpoint also. Because if we're carrying out this pay and grading review right now, the last pay and grading review cost the government $9 million. $9 million.
That's how much we spent on the
that was
review.
The annual. No,
that's how much
cost.
The increase in salaries.
The increase in salaries was $9 million per annum. And so that was roughly around 20%, right? Our public service costs now, if we were to do another 20% on what we're currently spending now, you're talking about spending about $12 million or so. But if you go even further than that, it would be very difficult for us to demonstrate how we can be able to afford going, adding an additional $15 million annually to the budget, or $20 million annually to the budget, unless we increase our revenue.
Our revenue would have to go up.
And our revenue right now is built on tourism
stamp,
economy,
stamp
right?
duty, tourism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's not, we don't have any fixed taxes. We don't have income tax. We don't have property tax. We don't have VAT and so on. And so we're really, really dependent on how our tourism numbers grow. And so it's very difficult for us to increase our fixed expenditure by those large rates unless we can really, really show that our revenue is grown and that we can sustain that level of revenue growth.
Yeah. AJ, you mentioned the private sector attracting people and being able to pay more. With the absence of a bond, where TCIG paid for education, as an accounting professional, why did you choose the public service?
I always wanted to give back to my country. So I went to school and I graduated in the top 10th percentile of my graduating class. My GPA was 3.9. And I went to school in the U.S. So they offer you what they call OPT. And you can do that for a year. And if you are successful and the company decides that they want to take you on, you can stay on for a much longer period on a work permit. Because of where I was in my graduating class, I was offered the opportunity that I could have gone and worked for a company in the U.S. The offer was actually with one of my classmates who was working at Carnival, who said, an older lady who was working with me, who said, I think you should come and work with us at Carnival. You do a great job. But I always wanted to come back home. I always wanted to come back home. And so the choice was very easy for me because I wanted to come back and to give back to Turks and Caicos. And it worked out in my favor because I came in and I was able to come into government and I was able to build a career in the public service. And, I've had offers from the private sector since I've been in government, but I've always chosen to stay with government because that's what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I would want other persons to choose the public service as their career path also.
I agree. We're a building nation. We need our best and brightest to make that sacrifice. We don't have the luxury of taking some of these advantages or these opportunities these other countries are offering us. So again, in another 20 years, God spare our life, our kids might be able to say, I'm going to go work overseas for 10, 20 years and come back home later. But right now, once you have that degree or that certain level of achievement, we need you to bring home what you've learned as soon as possible and help grow Turks and Caicos.
Yeah. The acting governor is about to leave now, so I can ask her this.
She was saving this.
Acting governor, there's been a lot of talk on the street, and people have envisioned you in politics. Any plans?
No plans.
Absolutely that's the most definitive answer she's given all morning.
Yes.
I don't blame you.
Plans. I have no plans to enter politics. I respect all persons that are in the political arena, but I think that this is the path that was chosen for me. I believe that everything is set up by God. He ordains our path. And this is the path that was chosen for me, and this is the path that I will continue to work on until it's my time to exit the public service and then to move into private life. But I do not have any political intentions.
Our loss.
Listen, her resume speaks to the role of Governor General in an independent Turks and Caicos Islands. So there will always be a role for HE to play
in the public service.
So people planning things. Yes.
Acting Governor, we want to thank you so.
Chris inspired.
I have to. So, if an opportunity came for you to act as governor in another territory, would you take it?
Oh, how'd that work?
Is that possible?
How does that work?
So, in terms of the possibility, I'll say this here, that the UK has been very clear that unless Turks and Caicos is an independent territory, that you will not have a governor appointed locally. In order to become a governor in another territory, I would be required to leave the TCI and to
be a citizen,
to work for the Foreign Office first, and then to be able to vie for one of those, to vie for a governorship position. So that is the protocol for the appointment of governors.
Because the deputy governor is a local appointment, as opposed to the
by
governor,
the Constitution. The deputy governor by the Constitution is a local appointment, and the governor is an appointment made by the United Kingdom through the Foreign Office. And most times those positions are only advertised within the Foreign Office and to current UK civil servants. That is the way that they're advertised.
Good. That's good info. HE, we want to thank you so very much. But just before we go, take a minute each. Speak to your public service and then speak to your community.
Okay. So what I want to say is, first and foremost, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands for their unwavering love and support that they've shown to me during my entire tenure as deputy governor, but even so, the last few weeks that I've been acting in the capacity of governor, it has not been a very easy period. We've had a lot of work to carry out over the period, but I've been very proud of the work that we've been able to do, and I believe it's only so because of the support that I've received from the public service and from the general public. I want to say to the public service of the Turks and Caicos Islands, thank you for the roles that they continue to play. I appreciate each and every one of you from every level across government. What I would want us to do is to work together to make the public service the envy of the islands. I want us to be able to improve the level of service that we give to the public so that when we leave the office each and every day, we would know without a doubt that we gave it our best and that we were helping to improve the livelihoods of people in the Turks and Caicos Islands. That always should be our goal. The Turks and Caicos Islands is a resilient country. We have been through a lot over the years, but we are a very proud country, and we've been able to accomplish a lot. And when I look at where we are now compared to where we were in the past and where we intend to go, our future looks very bright. But our future is dependent on the people of these islands and how we're able to work together to take us to where we need to go. And so I want to say thank you to everyone, and I would just want us to continue to work to build these Turks and Caicos Islands. We are in a very, very... We're in a very changing time at the moment, all around the world. There are numerous challenges that are being faced, but Turks and Caicos continues to make a name for itself. I mean, when you look at where we came from to where we are many years ago, people didn't know where the Turks and Caicos was. They had never heard about it before. And we've since then gone to being not only one of the most talked about countries in the Caribbean, we've become the envy of the region. And we're doing extremely well. But despite how well we're doing on the tourism side and on the economic side, that is not felt if the people of our country are not being a part of that growth and development. And so that is where we now need to take the future of these islands. And I intend to work my hardest to help us to be able to go where we need to in the future. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for having me here this morning. We have a very busy week ahead. I leave here now. We're going into a state of preparedness meeting because this is hurricane season. And we have to keep our eyes on Tropical Storm Brett. And then we have, of course, Cabinet tomorrow. And the Premier and I make a short trip to the Bahamas this week, actually, to support our police recruits. We have 18 police recruits that are graduating on Thursday. And so we're going to attend the ceremony in the Bahamas on Thursday and be right back here on the weekend. And next week, the Turks and Caicos Islands will welcome the 16th governor of the Turks and Caicos Islands. And we look forward to welcoming her and having her take on her new role as governor of these islands and as we transition into this new period in our history. So thank you.
And AG, we want to thank you, not just for being here this morning, but for the job that you've done over the years, the job that you continue to do. I think I speak for all of us when I say we remain a grateful nation for all that you've done. So thank you so very much. Listeners, viewers, you've been listening to the Acting Governor of the Turks and Caicos Islands, Her Excellency Anya Williams, here on First Edition. I'm Cheryl Ann Forman.
And I'm Shibaga Jolly.
RTC, the nation station. Yeah, the nation station.